Hey, Silas here. This video is going to be about how racism is proof of equality. I say this because racism isn't owned by any one race. It's not the province of any one race. It's not owned by any one people. Racism itself is not racist. Any group can be racist, and any person can be racist. I realize this ever more so in comparing the ongoing violence following the recent re-election of Uhuru Kenyatta in Kenya that has seen 24 people killed since the announcement of his win late Friday night. The other event is the Unite the Right event in Charlottesville, Virginia. This went on yesterday and earlier on today. It was an event supposedly by some white nationalists and others of the supposed alt-right who are congregating together against, I think, the taking down of this statue of General Robert E. Lee. I'll also leave links, some interesting history about Robert E. Lee that I learned while trying to find out information about why so many places in America are named Arlington. It has something to do with Robert E. Lee having married the great-granddaughter or something of somehow related to George Washington, and that leading to naming the location where they lived as Arlington. That's why Arlington Cemetery is there. And with these things, I'm kind of wondering how far back do people want to go with taking away names of people related to the South or to slavery or to times where there were a lot more racial issues in America than they are today. This rally was met by counter-protesters, including somebody plowing into the crowd, killing one and injuring over a dozen. A related accident with one of the police helicopters that were surveying the area crashing has also resulted in the death of 2 other officers. At the point of me making this video, I'm still not quite sure about the intentions of the person who ran into this crowd. There was quick work done in identifying the vehicle, tracking the person down. There was some misidentification of it being attributed to somebody else, but somebody has been arrested and is in custody, and I might update that with links in the low bar. But in general, this shows that the race to the bottom continues with racial and identity politics. I expect worse before any improvement. Before I go forward, let me read the definitions of racial and racist, as I think these terms are not equal and believe they're often confused and misused. So the term racial, this is an adjective. This is of relating to or based on a racial minority. It could also be explained as existing or occurring between races, as in when you're talking about racial equality. The term racist is a belief that a race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. So in use, this is racial prejudice or discrimination. This is when you consider and act on the idea that one race is superior to the other race just by them being of that race. So that being said, there were actual pictures I've seen of KKK people and Nazi flags indicating there were neo-Nazis and KKK people at that event or at that location today. I don't know if they were involved with the event yesterday, but got to say here, KKK and neo-Nazis are proud racists. They will call themselves racist. If you call them a racist, they will say, yes, I am a racist. I am proud of it. I wish the same could be said about other racial groups that are claiming supremacy of their groups. Black Panthers, for example, do claim black supremacy. If a white person joining the KKK and claiming white supremacy makes that person racist, then a black person growing any group and claiming for black supremacy does make that black person equally racist. If you say no, if you think that only the white person can be racist, then you yourself are racist because you're saying one racial group is here on the ability to make something racist, to say these words. Say the same words. If you're this group, you're here. Say the same words. If you're this group, you're here. Which is superior? You're saying this group is superior to this group by saying the same words. So let me get into the relation of this common post-election violence in the third world country of Kenya. As I mentioned in the previous video about the election, there was some post-election violence in the 2007 election, 2 elections ago, that saw over 1,000 people killed and about 600,000 people internally displaced. That just means there were refugees within their own country as they were moved from the locations they lived in originally before the election. This country that is a little over 50 years old, and the world's main superpower in the United States of America that is over 200 years old and a supposed melting pot of cultures. So this is more proof how the same things can happen for different reasons. Here are some lines from some news stories that I found. This first one is from Patrick Gadara, a strategic communications consultant, writer, and award-winning political cartoonist in Kenya. This is a story in the Washington Post. It's an op-ed piece entitled, "Kenya's Elections Show How Media Has Sold Its Soul." So this excerpt goes this way. Much of this is reminiscent of what happened in the 2013 elections. 4 years ago, as the country again hung on tenterhooks, with politicians bickering over another presidential election, I wrote of a compact that had developed between the media and the public. Kenya would have a credible election no matter what. Back then, it was thought that a way to avoid the sort of violence that had nearly torn the country apart in 2007, on the back of yet another disputed presidential election, hope you're noticing a trend here, was to not ask uncomfortable questions about it. This compact that Mr. Gadara speaks of is reminiscent of, I think it was during one of the debates. Then candidate Trump was asked if he would recognize the results of the future election, and then he said he would wait to see what happened after it. You had media and other sources decrying, saying that him not saying that he would accept the results was an attack on the democratic process and the foundation of the United States of America. These same media sources and people have then proceeded to drone about the Russian hacking and other campaign interference ever since the win of President Donald J. Trump. Not just droning about it, but making claims and setting up situations to defend why there needs to be a constant resistance against the president and his administration. Now, next story is from BBC on August 4th, which is 4 days before the Kenyan election. This one is titled, "How Kenya Elections Put Strain on Ethnically Mixed Couples." Ethnicity plays a big part in Kenya's elections, with many people voting along communal lines and occasional outbreaks of political violence in which people are targeted according to their ethnic background. This can make life difficult for mixed ethnicity couples, as the BBC's Dickens Olewe in Nairobi found ahead of next week's election. "Mommy, do you hate Raila or Uhuru?" Naomi Wangui and Malaki Sampson's young daughter shocked them recently by choosing this way to ask how they felt about the presidential candidates. The question stunned Naomi, and even though she tried to explain to her daughter how political competition works, she was taken aback by her characterization. Hate is a strong word, even for a 6-year-old. I think it's a perception she's picked up from TV stations who project political competition as a zero-sum game, them versus us. Malaki is a Luya, a community that chiefly supports the opposition, while Naomi is from the Kikuyu community of President Uhuru Kenyatta, who is seeking re-election. Mr. Kenyatta and opposition leader Raila Odinga, who is a Luo, have harnessed support from several ethnic communities, and it has become part of Kenyan political culture to presume that people from allied ethnic groups automatically back them. These perceptions complicate the life of mixed ethnicity couples. So here you can see how the BBC is covering how ethnic tensions are very real in Kenya, or in people. So they discuss correctly the assumption that belonging to certain groups means that you support certain political candidates. I wrongly thought that this was something that was more common in developing nations, this ability to vote on tribal lines and not actual policies. I thought it detestable that people could be bribed on something simple as mkate na chai, which is just bread and tea that is often given out during the campaign season. Hell, take the milk and tea and then go vote on policy once you enter the ballot box. But no, this doesn't just happen in Kenya. It also happens in the United States of America and other countries. In the West, people from different continents move there, and then it is stated that they do not need to integrate because there is no such thing as voting on ethnic or cultural lines, which is a bold-faced lie. In actuality, people vote on irrational feelings, often based on erroneous information. Another commonality that I did not see before is hate. This isn't just between the races or nations, but it is often said about the left and right paradigm that people on the right think those on the left are stupid, whereas those on the left think those on the right are evil. The problem with this is that evil is something that is to be fought, while stupidity is something that is to be taught. So when you think about this and you realize that people on both sides, on whatever situation, there's people who are capable of hating other people. And another thing, I think a secondary thing to add to this is there are some cases where some people might not be able to be taught, but I'll get to that later. So that being said, how does one change this? I think information and communication are key to this. I am frustrated with myself that it has taken so long for me to be more vocal about what I care about. It's taken a long time for me to think I was anywhere close to able to communicate the little that I know. In this process, which I've just begun, and I know I have a long way to go and a lot to improve on, I've been getting help from many different sources. For example, I just posted a video on how people define race. When somebody declares racial nationalism or racial power or racial supremacy, what do they mean? How did that race come to be? Are they transitioning races? Are some races are you the same race as your grandparents were? If your grandparents are who define who your race is, and let's say your grandparents moved from somewhere else and they consider themselves to be of another race, does that make you that other race since your grandparents thought they were from that other race? These are kind of thoughts that I've been thinking about and trying to make sense of for a long time. So by posting this video on social media, someone shared a link to a YouTube channel called Massaman, which is ran by this young guy called Mason. And it says that it aims to inform people on various potentially controversial subjects that most mainstream outlets don't cover or cover incorrectly, such as race, ethnicity, religion, and culture. There's going to be links in the low bar to that. I highly, highly suggest you check it out. He has really good videos, just really short videos kind of explaining what happens with races, how they migrated, how they moved around. Very interesting stuff. Covers different continents, different races. I think anyone out there with even the smallest amount of interest in racial issues or cultural issues or geography or what he's discussed here can find very valuable information in those videos. So since I've often wondered about race and definitions, in no small part due to my own background of having moved around, my family moved around. My first 5 years were in Paris, France. My next 5 years were in Nairobi, Kenya. Then I moved to Bethesda, Maryland, which is right outside Washington, D.C., and spent a lot of time in the States and back out to Europe after that. So due to that, I think it was not as straightforward for me to fall into any one default identity group due to location, customs, food, or other commonalities that normally define these boundaries of how people identify themselves. But one thing that I and you do share is communication, is the ability to share what you may know and also ask of others what they may know. So in a time when you want to know something and it gets to the point where you're thinking, okay, I'm wondering if this is true, you're just starting to think of something, and even before you formulated that thing into a question, there's likely somebody out there answering that question or somebody out there who has already answered that question. So when we live in that time, a time like this, it is such a shame to see so much willful ignorance all around in the world that results in such horrific and avoidable situations. So I may have been personally racist to think that this was something that people in the United States of America were, I thought that they were above falling for acting with little evidence. So here are more similarities on another story from the BBC. This story is entitled Kenya Election, Dangerous Limbo Ahead of Official Results by Alistair Lighthead. The opposition is relying on a huge conspiracy to explain its margin of defeat. So just how viable are the claims that the IEBC, which is the Independent Electoral and Boards Commission system was hacked? What's the evidence? How can it be proven or disproven? In an early morning press conference in a Nairobi nightclub, Mr. Odinga, flanked by his National Super Alliance NASA partner, made weighty allegations. Hackers gained entry into our election database through the identity of Chris Msando, who was executed barely a week ago. Mr. Odinga read hesitatingly from a prepared statement. Chris Msando was the acting head of technology at the IEBC and had appeared on TV reassuring the public that the system was secure. He was tortured and strangled. There have been no police update yet on their investigation. So a few things here. NASA, I remember hearing that, like NASA, when they announced the actual name of this coalition, the opposition coalition, I'm thinking, NASA, why would they run with that name? And this just shows that in different places, people have different access to information. When people in Kenya now hear NASA, they think of this. If you, or like me, who spent time in America, who are more aware of some more international things, when I heard NASA, I was like, they're just taking the National Aeronautics Space Agency's name, which is the space program in America. But for Kenyans, NASA is not as commonly known as it is for other people. Now, another commonality here, the hacking. Election hacking should sound very familiar to you people in the West. NASA might not be familiar to people there, but election hacking should be familiar to you people in the West, especially people in America. And with this situation in Kenya, there is the very real case of Mr. Masando's torture and death that is tied to this hacking. In the USA, there's also the suspicious death of one Seth Rich. I assume that it was just Kenyans who were uninformed with the process of politics. It's why they would literally lynch someone who was found stealing food in the market, but vote for a politician who had misappropriated millions of shillings. They had no concept of money, I would tell myself. No concept of how politicians can have foundations that others invest in with the unspoken agreement that once that politician gets in power, that politician will give favorable legislation to those donors. I thought, okay, they can't get this. How would I explain this to them? I would tell myself that if Kenyans were just like the Americans I knew, were just like the people that I had lived with in the United States of America, if only they were aware of this information, then they would not support these politicians. Surely, if they were clearly shown that people within certain political parties had colluded to put forward certain candidates and policies, they, like Americans, would recoil from this. I stand corrected. Willful ignorance isn't limited to any one race, culture, or people. I see what has happened during and after the election of Donald J. Trump to the presidency of the United States. I see how inconsistently things are covered and treated. I see actual hate manifested. I'm not stupid, but I'm also far from one of the smartest people in the world. I may have more time in my hands than most people and choose to observe things in different ways than others that I meet, but this information that I've found is free for others to see. You know, thinking of the coverage that has gone on just since the election, before the election, thinking about how things in Kenya are covered, while talking to family members that are still there, while thinking about experiences that I have been to, where I've been to events, protests, marches here in America, where I experience it personally and then I see how the media covers it. I see how people from the outside cover it. I've been in Kenya during events such as the horrific terrorist attack at the Westgate Mall. I was just in the general area, visited that area, walking by the area, and then going back and seeing how the international media covered it. And just getting some healthy form of skepticism about where I get my information, what spin is being put on it, what the intention of the people who might be giving me this information is. But I think that's a good thing, because for me, sensible people are also going to watch how these stories are covered. Enough people will come and see this Charlottesville incident, for example, and wonder how this violence and hate could come from seemingly out of nowhere. How did these people just all of a sudden attack these anti-protesters? Why were these white nationalists just out here marching? Although with that white nationalist march, apparently it's an event that actually does occur yearly, and last year it was tried to be associated with Trump, and this year the same has been done, but I don't think it's necessarily directly related to that. But, for example, something like that. I came and I saw that, started researching, looking, where is this thing coming from? Why were these people here? Why were they with torches? What were they thinking of? And then more people will do that. Then they'll see that other violence, other issues, other stories have been swept under the rug by the news and other sources. They'll recall issues such as the shooting of Representative Scalise, which I also covered in a video, where this guy went to a baseball field, asked, are these people Republicans? The person said yes, and he proceeded to shoot at these people. They'll see how that was covered. You'll see how the media calls for Trump and company to damn this situation in Charlottesville on racial and political lines, and then compare it to the shaming of anyone who dared call for it in previous acts of terrorism, if not outright defending those groups that are associated with any group that terrorist or terrorists may be part of. So they'll see the common factor of state involvement and how it exacerbates racial and other tensions all over the world, across all cultures, since the beginning of states. So something being racial is not equal to it being racist. Let me repeat again. Something being racial is not equal to it being racist. There are racial differences that do not automatically mean that one race is superior to the other race. Even if it is evidenced that certain races have a general affinity to certain things and weaknesses to other things. A weakness example would be something genetic, like a weakness to sickle cell anemia, to those of African heritage and other areas that are more prone to malaria. I think this has something to do with how the blood fights or reacts with the malaria virus. Other things that are considered generally positive, like height, can even differ within similar races. For example, with North Korea and South Korea, the North Koreans are actually 3 inches on average shorter than the South Koreans, and this is due to nutrition and other differences brought by due to the vastly different governments that these two people have. Now again, these are supposedly, another big key one is IQ. They say, okay, high IQ races behave in certain ways, yet you see certain situations where something like socialism and communism in these large states have developed and have horrible, horrible consequences across IQ people, whether it's high IQ Asians, higher IQ Asians, or lower IQ Sub-Saharan Africans, Latin Americans, South Americans, Venezuela, looking at you, etc. So yes, people will still act a fool. Across all races, ideologies, genders, and more, fools do exist. As I said in the beginning, the race to the bottom continues with these racial and identity politics, and I expect it will get worse before any notable improvement is had. As long as people continue to advocate for silly and illogical causes, they will activate silly and illogical people who will logically act in ways that are serious and at times deadly. So the most I think I can do, and you guys can do out there, is account for these sort of people. Account for these fearmongers. Account for the fools that will listen to them. Account to the crazies out there. Account on them existing. And do the most you can to get the people you care for, and find ways where you don't have to count on these people helping you have the best life you possibly can. So there'll be some links in the low bar, and just a lot of frustration with this situation. I'm going to post a video tomorrow about this event that I went to yesterday, which was a hexing of Donald J. Trump. And I remember thinking before the hexing, somebody was asking me why I was there. There was a reporter there, somebody getting a story, and I was thinking, I'd seen in some elections in Kenya, they had these random things where you see like a hexing or witchcraft or witch doctors kind of coming out and blessing or cursing the people they like or the people they don't, and thinking, yeah, that's a really odd thing that you see in a developing country like this. It's not a general thing. It's not like this person comes on national TV and the national 7 o'clock news broadcast and with a candidate standing next to him, but you just see kind of random story like, yes, this random witch doctor in this village has cursed such and such person. Yet you see that same thing here in America. Like I said, this isn't a race thing. It's some black witch doctor jumping around in the countryside of Kenya and the village. And here, just Brooklyn, New York, I go to a place and there's a witch or a magi or a wizard, I don't know what he considers himself, being attended at this event with a bunch of, for all intents and purposes, they seemed white, just white women, mostly white women, sitting there cursing the president of their country, giving a hex on him. So more on that tomorrow, and I might discuss more of the news about this attack if more comes out. I'm going to go out and get more information on it, and Till next time, bye.